Hello and welcome back to the 8th episode of the Automated Special series, which is focusing on SAP automation and integration with Power Automate. So in this episode, I'll show you how you can build an SAP GUI-based automation, leveraging pro-code techniques with VB-script and custom selectors in Power Automate Desktop. In this episode, we will review our pro-code options for SAP GUI automation in Power Automate Desktop. So I have another boilerplate, which is a template, a starter template. I usually define if I have applications to be automated more than at least once. So let's open that pro-code option. And again, saving it with a different name so I don't overwrite it. So like the previous episodes, I have a main section here which calls different subflows in a sequential order. So we have here our SAP logon we have created and recorded in the 6th episode. And then we have a pro-code processing part. Here we have a run VB script action. And we will paste here the code which will be generated by the SAP recording engine. And we do then some changes to the parameters as well. Then we have an if statement, so in case there is an error returned from that run VB script, we can terminate that process, the desktop flow processing, and also show a display message, but of course only during debugging. So if there is no script error, then the length would be 0 actually, and it continues the flow here. And in case I'm also returning something back like a purchase requisition number, I will be able to catch this here with this if statement and then assign our variable which is returned to whatever output variable, in our case here processing results, so I can feed this back to the calling flow. Then we have the log off, which is closing the windows. Actually, let me delete these. And then the exception handler again, which gets the latest error in case of an exception, and this exception will then be called because I have here in the main a on block error, and if I double click on that, so what this is doing in case of an error, it runs then this subflow which is capturing the get last error message and assigning this again to our output variable and then terminating that flow. So if we go back to the exception handler, here you see it's then collecting the last error, assigning it to our output variable, and then stopping the flow with an error message, which will be actually the get last error results. So in the previous episodes, we were using a purchase requisition Excel sheet. Let me open this. So here we have that purchase requisition form, which holds some categorization here, like the delivery date category, cost center, material group, but also the plant or office, and the header node. And here are the lines with the materials we would like to order or request at least, and this is extended to a third line, including now as well brown packaging tape. So we will load this into Power Automate Desktop, extract the information in the upper part and the lower part, and transfer this information to an SAP purchase requisition through VB script and SAP's own recording engine. And we will use the VB script which has been generated in Power Automate Desktop in this run VB script action here and feed in some parameters and make this more dynamic. Here again, because the SAP purchase requisition screen is dynamic when it comes to the purchase requisition lines, we have to do some special handling here as well in the VB script to accommodate for these changes. So let me start here by creating a new subflow which will load our Excel data. For that we can copy over what we have done in our previous session. So let me open the previous episode, which was the low code option. And here we have the Excel processing part, launch Excel, reading the data into memory, and then assigning variables for the header information. So let me actually mark all of them and then copy and get them over to the pro code section here by just pasting. Okay, so what we have to do here, we have also to call that Excel. So let me duplicate this and then point to that Excel processing part and save. Now, since this is a more advanced scenario here with the pro code approach, we could also leverage a different technique to log on to SAP. Here we were just going through the UI, we were calling the SAP logon and then filled in the fields in the user interface. There's a different way. Let me actually create another subflow. Let's SAP Again, run application. So there's also an executable which is called SAP shortcut. So SAP shcut.exe should be in the same folder as the other one. So here I'm referencing this. You can also, of course, navigate through the select button here. Then there are a couple of command line arguments. Let me paste them in for, so start and then minus system equals, and then we have here the variables as you see on the right for system ID, client ID, user, and password, and then here also a flag at the end which maximizes the windows once it has been started. The rest we can actually keep as is. We could also, instead of putting this, we can here say maximize. Okay, so let me save that. So in order to test this here in the development environment, you would have, of course, to supply parameters here manually, the default values for those parameters in order to test that. If you are calling this from a Cloudflow, which we will be doing later on, we can pass them in as secure strings. So let me actually provide those default values. Okay, so let me minimize this. So since this continues immediately, I also want to wait for window to make sure the SAP system has been loaded before I continue providing a transaction code or so. For that we go here to window, and then we have the SAP easy access window. Okay, and then focus window after it opens. Yeah, we can do that and then save. Now it's waiting, and once it's loaded, it has been brought to the foreground and also continued the flow. Good, so this is the second option we have to connect to an SAP system next to the UI-based automation, of course. So the no-code and low-code episodes, they have included actions and UI-based automation through either clicking on elements or using the desktop recorder found here in Power Automate Desktop. Now in the Pro Code episode, we will be looking at a different approach. We can leverage actually SAP's own recording engine and then extract that VB script and reuse it here in that VB script actions to drive the overall user interactions in SAP. So let me show you. So here on that button for customizing local layout, you will see a script recording and playback action. If this is grayed out, then you would have to double check on RZ11 if SAP user scripting has been enabled. If you don't have sufficient privileges to access this, then always consult, of course, your administrator or basis team. Now here we can see that the current value is to true. Should this be false, you can change the value here. Then close this. So back here we can click on that button again and then script recording and playback. This will open the dialog here. If you click on more, you will see where the generated VB script will be stored. And if I hit now record, everything I do in the system will be recorded. Whether I click on these icons or I type something, all those steps will be registered. So let me open the purchase requisitions. And let's create a purchase requisition from scratch. So this is new PR, okay. I hit enter. This will activate again the lower part where we have to specify the cost center. You can say consume and then enter. And we head over to the second row. Again enter. And here, let's say we put something else. Okay, and then I can save. This has created a new purchase requisition, and then I exit and I stop recording. Let's have a look at the code which has been generated by SAP. We open VS Code, and here's the generated code. It starts with some initialization here on top, and then with the main window. To maximize that window, provide the transaction code into the transaction field, and then hits enter. So send key 0 is an enter key. The first control which is then captured is the header text, providing the text we have inserted here, and then goes to the purchase requisition lines in that shell object. And here you see hard-coded row 0, row 1, and also the text, of course, here is hard-coded. Now, you will also might have noticed that the SAP LME GUI is here 0013, and for the second row and onwards it will be 0020. The same case we had previously for our dynamic UI selectors. We have to apply here as well this speciality of dealing with these dynamic selectors. So to demonstrate that this is really usable one-to-one, let me Control A, Control C, and bring this over to Power Automate Desktop to the Run VB script action. So here we double click on that script and we paste everything we have in our clipboard and just save. Since the SAP window is still open, we can right away start from here, run from here, and see what is happening then in the SAP system. You will notice it will be very fast, much faster than the previous options we had. Adding the cost center, creating the second row. And here the other cost center. Then it saves the record and exits the screen. Great, so you have seen it's really, we didn't do any changes to that SAP generated code. We could just reuse that as part of the Power Automate Desktop by using the Run VB script action. Of course, we would like to make this now much more dynamic and also supply the information as variables we have defined here in our Excel sheet. So let's head back to our VB script in VS Code. So the first thing we can do is to replace the hard-coded text here with our Power Automate Desktop variables. Let's check them. So we open the Run VB script. Let's enlarge this a little bit. So here we have this hard-coded text. We can replace actually all of that. And then we have here that function where we can select our variables. Header node. Then the next one was the account assignment category. The next one was material. So this will be interesting because the material, as you might recall from a purchase requisition Excel sheet, we have multiple rows there. So we have to apply that in a loop. So let's skip for now the material, also the quantity, the unit. Then we have the delivery date category. Here we go. And we have the material group. We have the plant. Purchaser group. Requester. And the cost center. And then we have the send key, which is an enter. Then the second row starts, but let me remove that for now because we have to make this more dynamic due to that 0020 and 0013 screen name change. Good, let me delete this as well. So that looks good. This would create now one record, one purchase requisition line with the parameters we have read in from our Excel sheet. Let me save that. Let's make sure SAP is closed and we can run it from the beginning. And this time it uses the data from the Excel spreadsheet for this one row, hits enter at the end and then saves the record and exits. Okay, so it closes then the UI and returns back to the beginning. Good. So let's go back to our Pro Code processing. So this has worked perfectly. Now we have to iterate through our purchase requisition lines we are collecting here in the Excel spreadsheet. So in these 3 rows we have here, let's review the data. 1, 2, 3 records and 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. So let's go to the actions, and we have here loops, and here we have a for each loop. Let's put that here. This would be the current item, and our iteration should go through the purchase requisition lines. We also need a row index. Let me create a row index variable. Let's call this purchase requisition line index, and we initialize it with 0. And within our loop, we will increment that by 1 for each iteration. So here there's this increase, our variable, and increase by 1. Okay, so let's review that run VB script again. Let me actually copy this over to VS Code so we can see that better. Create a new VB script. So this is the transaction part, maximizes the window, it provides the transaction code, and then it creates the first header node here on top. Okay, so let me actually bring this into Power Automate Desktop again, and let me replace that. So the first part should really be the purchase requisition header. I don't want to do anything else here in that part. And then we will loop through each and every purchase requisition line in the table and add the respective record. So for that we need another run VB script. Leave this open. And now for that we need the other part. So let me remove actually this. If we go here, the account assignment category, we have the 3 values we need from our purchase requisition iteration. So from the current item, let me go back. So let me copy that part up until here, and we paste it here. Now this is for the first row. We said we have this 0013. The second row onwards, this will change to 0020 for all subsequent rows. So we need to handle this also in a second. But for now, let me first get the material, unit, and also quantity here. So remove that hard-coded string. We go to the current item, because the current item is our current iteration of the purchase requisition lines. And then the material is in the first column, so it is column 0. Then we have the quantity. Let me copy this, which is in the third column. So because this is 0 based, we have here a 2. And then the unit is the last column, the fourth one, and here we would have then a 3. Then we have material group, plant office, purchase, and so on. Okay, and then at the end we have also our cost center, and we hit enter to accept that row. Good. So let me copy that over. This is how the code currently looks like. Now you recall we have created a purchase requisition row index. We have of course to replace now this 0 with that index variable. So let's go back. Let me copy that name and replace the zeros. Shift Alt, you can multi-select and replace that. Good. So we have now made this dynamic. In the second row this will be 1, and the third row this will be 2. The last thing we have to deal with now are these differences here. The first time it is 13, then it becomes 20. So in order to make this part configurable, we can ask our GUI user area. So set GUI user area of the SAP window. This should be session find by ID, and here we can copy this one. This is the core window and the user part in that window. Then we can get the screen name. This is the GUI user area, children, and then the first child. And then to get the screen name, we can say name. Now we have of course to replace that. So this thing here, let me actually run this in an action so you see what the output will be. Let's just get here run VB script. We paste it and then we get a message box saying screen name. In order to test this, the SAP GUI must be open, of course, and you have also to be in that purchase requisition transaction. So let me do that. Here we go to the purchase requisitions and let's run that script. Let me also do a breakpoint so it doesn't continue from here on automatically. Okay, so this is what the screen name looks like for this first iteration. If I do this in the second row, this would then be 20 or whatever number in your system will be relevant here. Okay, so sub 0 : sample GUI : 0030. If we go back to our VS Code, this is that part here, the dynamic part. Okay, so we can replace this up to here. We can say, let's do until 13 for now. We cover this in a second. Here we can say OK. And this would be screen name. Since you have seen these changes here from 13 to 20, we have to do the same code to collect the screen name before that call here, and then we can reuse this string manipulation. All right, and this was the cost center here, which is not part of that same grid. This was a control in the lower part for cost center. Good, and then we hit enter again. Perfect. So let me copy this over. Now we have made this part dynamic. We have also dynamic rows, and then the content coming from our variables of the purchase requisition Excel sheet. So let's go back to Power Automate Desktop. We can stop that, delete this one, remove our breakpoint, and then replace the code in here. Okay, let's save. Make sure SAP is closed, and we run it again. Great, so that means the dynamic row selectors have worked. Let's also make sure we have a code that presses here on save and then on exit. Let's go back to Power Automate Desktop. We leave this open. So once the iteration is through, we need another run VB script, which is then saving that record and exiting that transaction. So let's go here, back in our VS Code, and these are the two buttons we have to click. And we also need the initialization code here on top. This one here. So if I click now on that save button and then exit, I will not be able to extract the purchase requisition number from the status bar. So how do we do that? We can now, after save, collect that specific information from the UI. Let's save that first. Let's use a trick to get that selector from the UI by adding a UI element. Then in SAP, we save. And this is what we want to extract now. You see GUI status bar, left control on the keyboard, and left mouse click. This will bring us the status bar. And then we say, and here, if we double click on that, double click here as well, here you see our selector. Let's copy that. Go in here. We can paste that. .text. And in order to send something back from that run VB script action, we have to use the Windows script host echo call. So in order to return something to that run VB script action, to put that in the variables, which is VB script output 2 in that case, let me actually rename that. This would be the purge rec status message, and this is the purchase requisition save operation. So in order to put something into that variable, we have to use the Windows scripting echo command. And here we have also to append that this is pane 0, and here vs script dot echo. And this will put whatever is in our status bar into this variable now. Let's save. So make sure SAP is closed again, and then we can run. Here's our script again, creating our 3 rows, and this time saving and collecting the purchase requisition number from the status bar. Save that record and then close the dialogues. Okay, if everything was right, then we should have here purchase requisition status. If you hover over that, that's exactly the text we're looking for. Okay, so if in case we have received an error, let's say on processing those purchase requisition lines, this would have been script error 2. Let's change that. If this would have something included in the script error text, then we would go into this if statement. And here we can then stop the flow with the message of the output of script error 2. If not, we will now assign the purchase requisition number to our output variable we have here for processing results. So how can we extract that number? As we have seen in the previous episodes, we can use regular expression from our parse text function. The text to parse is the purchase requisition status. Here we go. It is a regular expression, and identifying multiple integers in a row, this is how you do it, \d and a plus sign. This will extract an integer out of a string. Let's go to a website to test this quickly. So here is a testing site, that's my string. In order to extract numbers out of a string, you can do \, and d would give you 10 matches in that case. If you would like to have that in a row, you say plus, then we have 1 match of that whole string here. Okay, so we can use this \d plus. Starting position should be 0, and we don't need the position, but we want to have the resulting number, and we can directly assign this to our output variable, which is O_processing results. Alright, now the last step would be to change this as well to match the output variable name here. So only if we have a status bar text, then we would of course do that parse text here. Save. And let's run this now from the outside, from the console. This should be faster and also present us then with a message box at the end containing the purchase requisition number. Here we have a chance to change the SAP credentials if you want, and hit enter. Okay, so the processing result is a new purchase requisition number. So next we will look at calling this desktop flow from a cloud flow, passing in secure credentials from Azure Key Vault, and do also some exception handling on the cloud flow side. So let's head over to Power Automate portal, and we make sure that we are in the same environment so we can see our newly created desktop flows. Here in Power Automate, I'm in the solution area, and we create a solution for our new automation, and then create. So let's open that solution. We add first our existing desktop flows. So here we have our Pro code. Now let's create a new cloud flow that we'll call the desktop flow. We can manually trigger or leverage one of the other hundreds of triggers we have available in Power Automate. So next, let's add a desktop flow action, run a flow build with Power Automate Desktop. And if this is the first time you use that action, you will be required to supply a connection that looks similar to this. Now we have two options to establish a connection to that machine, to my machine in this case, or to a remote machine on a VM or somewhere in Azure. So for connectivity, you have two options. We have the on-premise data gateway and the newly deployed direct machine connectivity, which is part of Power Automate Desktop. So here in Power Automate Desktop in the console, if you go to settings, you will see a machine preview tab, which says that my machine is connected to that environment in the cloud. So I can use this connectivity mode if I don't want to use a on-premise data gateway. Then if I use a direct machine, then of course I would see my machine which has been registered, providing then domain username and password. But since I have that already, then here we will select our purchase requisition pro code desktop flow. Then we have two options, attended and unattended. For now we will use attended mode. And then here I'll be asked to provide the SAP credentials and so on. But before we do that, let's apply some basic exception handling here as well. So there are scope actions available in Cloud Flows, which you can configure for a try, catch, finally block scenario, for instance, for exception handling. So let me add another one. For that we can just copy this one, plus my clipboard and paste. If you have just a try and a catch block, that would be sufficient. So let me rename this. This is a try, the scope, and this is a catch. And here this should only run in the config run after if the previous one has failed or skipped or has timed out. Okay, you see that arrow became red now, so only in case of an exception this catch block will here be activated. So let me move that desktop flow action in here. And now let's add Azure Key Vault actions here to get those secrets so we can supply this to the desktop flows. Azure Key Vault, get secret. Here again you have two options. You use either the currently logged in user as a credentials or a service principal connection to that Azure Key Vault target. So here SAP system ID. Then we configure these to be sensitive in input and sensitive in output. So they are hidden from the flow run history. And let me copy this as well and paste 4 times. Okay, so this will be get system ID, get client ID. Make sure you have changed it here as well. Now we can supply those to the desktop flow. Let me rename this as well, something more meaningful. So in here we can just send an email if the bot was unsuccessful. Okay, let's give it also a name and save. Now let's test it. We trigger it manually. And in a couple of seconds we should also see the newly created purchase requisition number as part of that output here. Okay, so the scope didn't run because everything was successful within the try scope. And if we look here, the inputs and outputs have been hidden because we were leveraging the Azure Key Vault actions here, but the processing results is of course shown and showing us that a new purchase requisition has been created with 198 at the end. And this concludes our Power Automate desktop capabilities for SAP GUI based automation.